basically alleging that, because of the MLS system and the offer of compensation that's required in the MLS, that by forcing sellers to make that offer of compensation, and the discussions that go on at the kitchen table between sellers and their listing brokers, which we know it happens many times that listing brokers say you can offer whatever you want to, but if you don't offer X, whatever X is, your property is not going to be shown. That artificially inflates the commissions payable to buyer brokers, who are not actually negotiating those fees with their agents, but are relying on the sellers and the listing brokers to provide their compensation. And that on the other side of the table, that the system, the MLS systems, allow for buyer brokers to sort and determine what properties to show their clients. And we know that some, it's certainly not ethical or in many cases legal, some of those buyer brokers won't show properties if they're not paid a certain amount of money. And the combination of those two things obviously is anti-consumer.
What do you think needs to happen in the industry?
Well, first of all, I think there needs to be more transparency with how buyer brokers are paid in advance of actually that buyer agent or buyer broker retaining the services or providing services to their buyer. Sellers know that they pay a commission to sell their house. That's been going on for years, decades, right? On the other hand, there's been sort of because the selling office commission or co-op fee, or however you want to call it, the buyer broker fee, has always been deemed confidential information, that's not been as transparent. And so because of that non-transparency, we have some buyer agents out there that represent that their services are free, or don't worry about it because it's being paid by somebody else. That is really not true. Buyer agents are delivering a valuable service for their buyers. They do get paid, and buyers need to know how much they're getting paid in advance of those services being performed, so that if they want to negotiate them, they have a chance to negotiate them.
Okay, great. And I know that in there, the NAR attorney was saying, it's ethically right, it's in our bylaws, if you will, that you have to show every property.
Correct.
Is that really happening?
No. We know for a fact that there are agents out there, and what we don't know is the prevalence of it. We don't know how often it happens, but we do know, and just go to Facebook groups, agent Facebook groups, and this discussion, and you'll have agents say, look, if I'm not going to get paid X amount, I'm not showing the property, right? Well, that's not right? And buyers don't know because that information is secret. So I think the first thing that we need to do as an industry is remove the secrecy or the non-transparency over the co-op fee, and make that disclosed to buyers. Or before, we know, again, in the old days when we had the book, right? This was a long time ago, right? Buyers weren't out searching for properties because they didn't know what was available. They had to go to the agent, and the agent was there at the beginning. Now we know with Zillow and Realtor.com and all the portals, there's a ton of searching going on well before that buyer actually gets the services of a buyer's agent. They should have transparency as to the houses that they might be interested to, what the person who's going to provide them services is going to get paid on those houses. So they can know, one, if they're not being shown houses, that's a good question to ask their agent, right? Why aren't you showing me house on 1234 Main Street? But also by doing that, they can get a sense of what the compensation amounts are in the industry, and if they choose, negotiate them. And then it's up to the buyer broker to then defend their compensation, which happens on the list side, but not so much on the buy side.
Oh, gotcha. So when you hear them talk about, like, I know this has been brought up in a lot of articles, but in the European countries, there's only like a 1% fee, whereas in America, since the 50s, even with the rise of the internet, the fee's staying the same at 6%, even though the buyer agent isn't working as hard as the speculation as they may have had to 40 years ago, but their commission's the same. Right.
I disagree with they're not working as hard. I think just because they're being delayed in terms of when they engage with the buyer, I believe that buyer's agent, with the amount of information on the internet today, are working just as hard, if not harder, to bring that buyer to a deal and a closing and deliver the good buyer agency services. So it's easy to say, well, technology has come in, they're engaging with buyers later, they're doing all this searching on their own, so they're working less. I don't buy that argument. I think that the good buyer agent actually has to, because the buyer's on their own for so much of that search time, many times they're coming in and they have to then counsel the buyer as to what's really going on in the market versus what the buyer's trying to figure out on their own, and they're making the job actually harder. So I don't believe in the European model. I actually helped draft one of the first sweeping buyer agency legislations in the country in the mid-90s. And bottom line is I think buyer agency is a critical component of our pro-consumer real estate system, and buyer agents deserve to be paid. We just need to become more transparent in how they're paid.
What's the difference between America's system and the European model, where we're looking at a 6% commission fee versus a 1%? What's the difference between the two?
Well, first of all, there's no MLS. Right, and so arguably, because there's no MLS and there's only one broker involved, right? There's an estate agent there. You don't have the kind of broad-based exposure to the market that we have here, which is really good, and you don't have independent representation. And for many consumers, the most complicated, expensive, valuable transaction of their life, and therefore, there's going to be more fees, and there probably should be more fees. I would argue that the European system is broken. They should follow our system.
Yeah. So we heard that the NAR attorney thinks that these class action lawsuits or antitrust lawsuits are going to be thrown out or dismissed.
Right.
And you had some pushback on that.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think, first of all, a motion to dismiss at the federal level, basically, there are factual allegations in this lawsuit that are true. NAR has to say that they're not true because they're doing their job, right? But they are true. What we don't know is how often they happen, the impact of when they're happening and why they're happening, and whether that actually means that there's an antitrust violation. We don't know any of those things. But if you look at the facts, the allegations, we know that some of this is happening, and therefore I think there's very little chance it's going to be dismissed on a motion to dismiss. That doesn't happen very often anyway, because the courts want to actually allow people to argue their cases as opposed to throw them out before they get a chance to. And then we're going to have discovery, and when discovery happens, Katie bar the door, because there's going to be a lot of poking around this industry that is going to, as the term goes, shine the light on some things that maybe the industry doesn't want to have the light shine on.